So this summer I got to read a lot of books because I was away late and I couldn't do too much, so I thought, well, I'll read. And I got to read a lot of books that I hadn't had a chance to read, or things that people have recommended to me while I'm working on the desk. And so I have decided to talk a little bit about what I read this summer, and also talk about some of the books that I really, really like and recommend to you. We'll start off with, because I read mostly nonfiction, you're not going to get a fiction review from me. So if you're hoping for that bestseller book, you're not going to get it from me. But we have some bestsellers that were on the nonfiction list, and I'm going to talk about, probably an opposing viewpoint, but Helen Gurley Brown. There are now 4 biographies about Helen Gurley Brown. We have 2 of them here at the library. The other one is Becoming Helen. This is Enter Helen. Fascinating profile of a woman who created the Cosmo Girl and didn't believe in any woman really subjugate, or she's talked about the Cosmo Girl and created the Cosmo Girl, the little sex kitten who was in charge of her own self. And Helen was really in charge of her own self, except when it came to her husband. And she let her husband make some decisions. And so one of the decisions that they made was they lived in California for a number of years, and she couldn't proceed to get her career started in publishing. She did some things, she wrote some stuff, but it was only after they moved to New York City and she got involved with Cosmopolitan magazine and became the editor-in-chief. And really, if you look at her, it's really a feminist story in a lot of ways, and very interesting in the sense that they were a unit. It's one of those stories about a couple that's really a unit. They worked for each other. David Brown, who was a Hollywood producer, was her husband, and he produced things like Jaws and there's The Sting, movies like that, and really was very successful at that, but sort of became semi-retired and went to the stage and worked on the stage and produced stage shows and really could work out in New York so Helen could pursue her career. Again, like previous women, Lucille Ball comes to mind right away. She was an icon, yet she was pretty much alone by the end of her life and had pretty much aged herself out of her job and did not keep current. She tried to, and then of course the powers that be didn't even listen to her after a while, and they forced her out, which is not a good way to do. Grace Mirabilis also comes to mind, another publishing icon in the 1960s, 70s, who was forced out. Frances Lear too. The books about Helen Gurley Brown deal a lot with her childhood, and she had a very interesting childhood in the South. And they talk, the other book, Enter Helen, or no, this is Enter Helen. The other one is the Helen Gurley Brown story. It talks about her relationship with her mother and her sister, and that's a truly fascinating triangle. So it's interesting in that sense. And again, an interesting woman who does deserve 4 biographies, I think. So whether you liked her or not, it's an interesting read. So to kind of pair with Helen Gurley Brown, I found this on the cart when I was on the switchboard one day. I was looking through the documentary cart, and I said, well, this looks interesting. She's beautiful when she's angry. And it's about the early days of the National Women's Movement, or the National Organization for Women. And I thought, okay, it's another Bella Abzug, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem book, or documentary. And it really isn't. It's about the core women that found it now, and how they became feminists, why they became feminists, what happened during the feminist movement. The feminist movement was born out of the civil rights movement and about the subjugation of women into those roles that women took on in the 60s and 50s and 30s and 40s. And it's what happens when women stood up and said, hey, if you're fighting for this group, there's a bigger group. And the true revolution will happen when women and men are equal. And we'll see what happens in November too, because, before you never thought you'd have a woman running for president, and we do. So, interesting documentary, and it'll keep you very intrigued, it would keep you involved too. And it made me want to look up a lot of these folks after the documentary to find out what's gone on in their lives since this was made. And this was made, it looks like in 2013. So it's a couple years old, but still worth watching if you're interested in the feminist movement, or if you're interested in any civil rights movement, because they all are related to one another. So we'll go back to another feminist. Gloria Steinem has written yet another book, My Life on the Road. She talks about touring and going out and pushing the flesh and doing the cause. And she writes, you know, she's been a writer all her life, so her writing is very easy to read, and it moves, it flows. And that's what I like about Steinem's books, is they flow. And so it's like reading a novel almost. Sometimes when you have nonfiction, it's sharp and it's to the point. But with Steinem, she writes, she flows. And I really did like the book. And you know, she is almost 80 years old. If she might be over 80 now. And you know, how much more time do we have with Gloria? And I think she should get as much written as she should, because she really has a strong, strong voice. Another woman with a strong voice, but on a subject that you wouldn't think about, Lesley Stahl. Talk about being a grandma and about the joy of being a grandma, because you don't think about what happens when you're a grandma. And it's really interesting, because it was about her journey as a woman and as a feminist too. Again, we've got this feminist theme going here today. And it's a different relationship. And she explains this really well in this, from being a mother to being a grandmother. And a lot of people feel that way about becoming grandparents. It's a lot freer. And it's just interesting. And she talks about her husband, and she talks about the relationship with her daughter and what changed when she became a grandmother. And you know, Lesley Stahl, you're used to seeing on 60 Minutes or at a press conference with the president. You're not used to really seeing her in that other role. And I thought that was a really good segue for her, and to talk about being a whole person. And it's interesting, and again, a good read. She's a good writer. I recommend it. So my beloved VH1 Classic went off the air August 1st, and they replaced it with MTV Classic. But one of the things that they are doing is they're showing the real world, the series about 5 people who live in an apartment and all kinds of things can happen. Well, the first season, Kevin Powell was on that. And this is his kind of semi-autobiography, memoir, history journey, powerful young man, good writer, poet, fiction writer, nonfiction writer, has a lot to say, if you remember him from the real world. He was kind of militant then. He's still a little militant, but he's also a little mellow now. And that, you know, that was 30 years ago. So interesting book. Again, interesting, I say, because it's a perspective that I don't know. And I'm always intrigued when I get to learn something new about somebody else and in another sense of place that I would not experience. So now we're going to go to some fun stuff, because I've also been doing fun stuff. Sara Moulton. You may see her on Create Channel. She has a show on that. That's the IPBN educational channel. It's not the British channel, but it's a good show, a good channel, because they have a lot of interesting people. And a lot of those television cooks that PBS has are all really interesting writers. Sara Moulton was discovered by Julia Child, of all people. And she was, for many, many years, the cook tester at Gourmet Magazine, and also wrote a column. She's written a couple books. This is a Cooking 101 book, Home Cooking 101 by Sara Moulton. If you don't know how to cook, or you're afraid to cook, I don't understand people that are afraid to cook. I have a niece that's afraid to cook, but if you are comfortable, this will make you comfortable, and it will make you, it's picture with each step. It talks about the ingredients, it talks about a grocery list, it talks about everything you need to know to become a good cook. And Sara Moulton has an easy way about her, in a way that she describes how to cook, how to buy things, how to make things, how to present things, because seeing the food is as important as tasting the food in a lot of ways. And again, she's very easy to follow. It's a good book. I really liked it. I would recommend Sara Moulton's Cooking 101. Humor, and food. Calvin Trilling, Roy Blount. Roy Blount has a song for every food thing. This is a really funny book. It's Roy Blount Jr. writes all kinds of stuff, and he writes humor and he writes serious stuff, but I like his humor mostly. And he's from the South, so there's a different kind of humor, and he writes songs about all these food things, and it's a very intriguing book in the sense that you kind of go back into the South, but also to like an ode to turnips. It's funny, and it's humorous, and it's a good escape. So I recommend this. This is Roy Blount, Save Room for Pie, Food Songs and Chewy Ruminations. Now, this just came in the other day, and I had it on reserve, so it's got my little reserve tag on it. It's called The Inn at Little Washington. And there's a chef, and he talks about putting together his little inn 35 years ago. And he's got rooms named after famous chefs. He's fed Julia Child. He's fed a lot of famous chefs. He talks about putting it all together and making it run and making it work. And beautiful pictures in this book. I love these decorating books, and I love these lifestyle books. And so I would totally recommend this. Pictures are wonderful. There's recipes in it. So it's a cookbook. It's a decorating book. It's all kinds of things thrown together. And it's an interesting story about a business. And I think it's a big book, but well worth your time. And it's fun. So, I like old TV shows. And I like books about old TV shows. And there's several books out there about TV shows like MASH and Bewitched, where they go through every single episode. Cheers, I think, has one too. And they go through every single episode and highlight different things. Happy Days, Wonder Years, they all have these kind of books. Well, there's finally one for the Golden Girls. It's called Golden Girls Forever. Now, the best of these books are written by fans. And the reason I say that is because they pick up little things that you don't notice. Like the chair moved. Or if you look, they got new curtains in this episode. They point all of this out. They also go through episode by episode, and they interviewed, he was very lucky that he got to talk to all of the Golden Girls before they passed on. I think the only one he didn't talk to was Estelle Getty, who by the time he started putting this book together, she was already ill. And so he did not talk to her directly. There's an interview with Betty White in here. B. Arthur talks a lot about the episodes. Rue McConaughey did. It's interesting also to note that they all died within 3 years of one another, except Betty, of course. Betty will never die. She's like a cockroach. But they all died at the same time, and you learn some things too. That one of them was set up to be Rose, and they came in and, oh no, you're not going to be Rose. And B. Arthur did not want to go back to television after doing Maude. She thought she did the best show. Why would she do it again? And it's a lot of work to do a weekly television show. But then her ego got into it because somebody was saying they're casting a B. Arthur-like character. And she said, why are they casting a B. Arthur-like character when B. Arthur is still alive? And so she was not happy that was going on. And so that's how she became Dorothy. And Estelle Getty's character was just supposed to be a minor character, but she tested out of the ballpark with audiences before the show went on the air, and they beefed up her character to the point that they had to exclude a character. If you'll watch the first couple of episodes of the series, you'll see they had a housekeeper. Well, because of Estelle Getty's growth and popularity, they had to nix the housekeeper. But it's a really great book because it goes through every single episode. So if you're watching and if you have the book, you can look up the episode and, oh, that happened during that. But if you don't want to do that, if that would ruin your Golden Girls illusions, then I would say don't read the book. But it is a fun book, and I would recommend this. This is one of those books, Grandma likes the Golden Girls. This would be the book you get her for Christmas, because then she can read all about the Golden Girls. Okay, so serious books, and probably two of the best books written of the whole year came out very well. One came up early in the summer, and one just came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. First of all, let's get rid of the crap book. Crisis of Character. It's a former Secret Service agent who testified in the impeachment hearing against Bill Clinton. Okay, so you know where we're going with this. But he's just vile. I mean, that's fine. You testified and that you did what you felt was best. And Secret Service, there's been some tell-all books by the Secret Service recently. Take them with a grain of salt. It's just like the books about the White House staff. You have to look at who the author is. You have to look at where their history is. I would recommend the book The Residents, which is it's got a lot of memories by a lot of staff. And most of that White House staff don't talk badly about presidents, and you learn about the inner workings of the White House, which I think is really fascinating. But Secret Service people who are paid to guard the President of the United States, I think should keep some kind of secrets. I don't know, maybe until 50 years after they're dead. It's a slam book. I don't necessarily say I support the Clintons, because there's some things I don't support about the Clintons, but I don't think they deserve this kind of book. So it's a bestseller. But a Secret Service agent that I truly admire and has written one of the best books of the year is Clint Hill. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, Clint Hill was the Secret Service agent assigned to Jackie Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. He was riding on the back of the car. He was told that he wasn't needed on the back of the car. He was one car back. He was guarding her, but he went through a lot of stuff because he felt he should have taken that bullet instead of JFK. And he had a famous 60 Minutes interview where he broke down, and he did have a nervous breakdown because of the stress and post-traumatic stress syndrome. They think now that there's a good book that was written about Jackie a couple of years ago that kind of said, her behavior after the assassination does mimic post-traumatic stress syndrome. We'll think about it, wouldn't you be? So, but let's get back to Clint Hill. Clint Hill was in the Secret Service from the 1950s until the 1970s. He had started with Eisenhower, worked with Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. And he has tales to tell about working all of those White Houses. It's not mean-spirited. It's just very factual. He's a very factual writer. He's a co-writer who helped with this book and Me and Mrs. Kennedy, which is a book that came out about 3 years ago about working with Mrs. Kennedy when he was Secret Service man for her. He was only a few years older than Jackie Kennedy too, so they were kind of contemporaries. So they did talk and meet, and he talked about being a Secret Service agent and the toll that takes on your family, and toll that takes it on yourself, just being all over the world and being at the beck and call of the president and having to guard the president and having to lose a president. One of the best books of the year, and it just reeks that they would make something, movie, documentary, something out of this book. Anyway, Clint Hill's 5 Presidents, very good book. The best book of the summer that came out just 3 weeks ago, and probably the best book of the year, I think, is American Heiress by Jeffrey Toobin. Now, Toobin, a couple of his books I have read, The Oath and The Nine about the Supreme Court. I found him kind of dry. But he really captured the era of what led to Patty Hearst being kidnapped. And if you don't know the story, Patricia Hearst, who is heiress to the Hearst family, the fortune, the publishing Hearst, they own newspapers, magazines, all kinds of stuff, Good Housekeeping, the San Francisco Examiner, just Hearst publications, and it's still a family-run business, her grandfather was William Randolph Hearst, enough said. 1974, she was living in Berkeley, California. She was going to school at Berkeley, living with her boyfriend. She was getting married in the summer, and 3 people knocked on her door one night, and her life changed forever, and she became a kidnapped victim. what he does is he paints a picture of the time in San Francisco that this took place. He talks about the people that are involved, and he does thorough human interest. He looks at each person and he talks about them, and when you see, not only was Patty Hearst talked, she's famous, but he talks about her parents, in particular her father, who comes across as he's just trying to get his daughter back, and he's trying to do what he could, and this changed him so much in terms of his outlook on people and his outlook on life. And Patty Hearst came full circle in this book, in the sense that through everything that she went through, and he does believe that she joined the SLA, that Symbionese Liberation Army, who kidnapped her. He believes she joined them willingly, and now she shows dogs at the Westminster Dog Show, and was champion 2 years ago. She came full circle. She went from being an heiress to being an heiress again, and her journey. She wrote a book, Every Secret Thing, came out about 20 years ago. Just talked about that period. She didn't talk about her life after that. And he talks a little bit, he fills you in on what happened to all of these people. And he paints how this all happened and why this happened and the results of it. And so it's written like a novel. It's a great book. Patty Hearst, again, just one of those footnotes in American history. But when I was 12 years old, this was the big, big, big news story. And I remember following this and reading Newsweek and seeing where she was and where's Patty? And then when they captured her, then she did her little salute to her cause. And you could, how could she do that? And then by the time of her trial, she was an heiress again, and was a wealthy young woman and part of the San Francisco society. And how do you switch all of that? Did she really join, or was she brainwashed? And Toobin leaves no stone unturned in this book. And I really do think this is one of the best books of the year, if not the best book of the year. And it does read like a novel. And you're sitting there going, wow, at the end of it. I've just been on a big journey. So that's it for the summer reading. I'm going to be back later. I've got a couple things that I'll be doing that I'm thinking about. So I'm looking forward to being here again. I've had a little bit of a break, so I'm ready to go. Thanks.